expressions. Just as the tension seems unbearable, she reaches for her phone and begins recording herself. Her calm voice rings out, narrating every detail of the encounter, her questions, his actions, and the laws she knows are on her side. The crowd falls silent, watching as her words shift the balance further. The officer freezes, his hand still on the radio. For the first time, he looks genuinely uncertain. He knows her recording could complicate things for him, especially with the crowd backing her up. But then another officer arrives, stepping out of the car with a deliberate pace. This new figure scans the scene, his eyes locking briefly with hers before turning to his colleague. There's a tension in their exchange, something unspoken but heavy. She realizes that even with more officers, the situation could go either way. And just as it seems the conflict is about to explode, the new officer says something that changes everything. The second officer steps forward, his presence commanding but calm. He gestures for the first officer to step aside, his tone measured but firm as he begins asking her questions. Unlike before, there's no aggression in his approach. The woman answers with the same steady composure, repeating her rights and detailing why she refused to comply with the initial demands. The new officer listens intently, his expression unreadable. The crowd, now fully invested, watches as the first officer grows visibly agitated. He tries to interject, but his colleague raises a hand, silencing him. Then, in a move no one expects, the second officer turns to her and says, "You're absolutely correct. There's no lawful reason for this stop." The crowd erupts in cheers, but the woman doesn't celebrate yet. She knows there's still unfinished business. As the first officer protests, the second officer's tone sharpens. "Your actions were unprofessional and unwarranted. This will be reported." Shock spreads across the first officer's face as his own partner calls him out in front of everyone. It's a moment of public accountability that no one anticipated. But just as the tension starts to ease, the woman delivers one final twist. She calmly hands the second officer a business card and says, "I'm an attorney. I'll see this through." The crowd roars in support, their voices echoing as she steps back into her car. With her calm confidence, she's not only protected herself, but also set a precedent that no one will soon forget. As the woman drove away, the crowd began to disperse, but the energy lingered in the air. People shared what they had witnessed, their voices filled with a mix of admiration and hope. The second officer remained behind, his stern conversation with his colleague serving as a visible reminder that accountability was being enforced. The first officer, now visibly deflated, had no choice but to confront the consequences of his actions. For the woman, this was more than just a personal victory. It was a moment to demonstrate the power of knowing your rights and standing firm, even in the face of intimidation. Her bravery sparked conversations within the community, inspiring others to educate themselves and advocate for justice. By the time her video reached millions online, it wasn't just about her story, it became a rallying cry for change. In 7 unforgettable minutes, she turned fear into empowerment and left a lasting impact. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a routine traffic stop takes an unexpected turn, sparking a confrontation that leaves everyone stunned. A black woman, calm and confident, finds herself face to face with a police officer whose intentions seem anything but routine. From the moment he approaches her car, his tone is sharp, his questions probing, his authority unmistakable. But she's no stranger to these moments. She knows her rights, her voice unwavering as she answers him. As the tension builds, the officer's attempts to intimidate her backfire in ways he never saw coming. What starts as an abuse of power quickly shifts into a battle of wits. With every move, she stays one step ahead, turning the tables in a way that leaves him speechless. How does this brave woman outsmart the man determined to control the situation? Stick around to see how this 7-minute encounter turns into a moment no one will forget. The officer leans in closer, his eyes narrowing as he repeats his questions, but she doesn't flinch. Her steady tone and calm demeanor seem to catch him off guard, throwing his confidence slightly off balance. This wasn't how he expected the encounter to go. In the back of her mind, she recalls the countless stories she's heard, encounters just like this one that spiraled out of control. But she refuses to let fear take over. Instead, she keeps her composure, knowing every word she says could shape what happens next. The officer grows visibly frustrated, his voice rising with each passing second. He demands her identification, but instead of panicking, she asks a simple question, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. For a moment, he hesitates, caught off guard. The tables are turning, and it's clear he's no longer in control of the narrative. Something is shifting, and he knows it. The officer's hesitation lasts only a second, but it's enough for her to see through the cracks in his confidence. She knows she has to tread carefully. She calmly asks why she's been stopped, her voice steady but firm. The question hangs in the air, and the officer, visibly irritated, deflects by accusing her of being uncooperative. His words are sharp, but she doesn't waver. Instead, she repeats her question, her tone unwavering, her eyes locked on his. Meanwhile, a small crowd begins to form at a distance. Passers-by slow down, some recording on their phones, their presence adding another layer to the tension. The officer shifts uncomfortably, aware that every move he makes is being watched. He tries to reassert his authority, raising his voice and leaning closer, but she meets his intensity with calm logic. Each of her responses chips away at his attempts to dominate the situation. As the moments stretch on, the officer's frustration grows. He threatens to escalate the situation, but she doesn't back down. She knows her rights and isn't afraid to remind him of them, pointing out the inconsistencies in his actions. The crowd watches, their murmurs growing louder as the power dynamics shift in ways no one expected. The officer's frustration turns to desperation as he fumbles for control of the situation. He insists she exit the vehicle, his voice stern and commanding, but she remains seated, her hands visible on the wheel. She calmly asks if he has probable cause, her tone cutting through his bluster like a knife. The crowd is now larger, and the phones pointed in their direction seem to rattle him. For a moment, he glances over his shoulder, realizing the attention he's drawn isn't in his favor. As he demands again, her response catches everyone off guard. She cites specific laws, her knowledge sharp and undeniable. The crowd murmurs in approval, their voices growing louder as they rally behind her. The officer hesitates, his confidence shaken further. But then he reaches for his radio, signaling for backup. The tension in the air is electric. The stakes have never been higher. Everyone wonders what will happen next. As the officer radios for backup, the woman glances toward the growing crowd. She can feel the weight of their eyes on her, a mix of hope and fear reflected in their